Hi, my name is Janice Sanders, and the panel that I am going to be monitoring today is the one called Historical Paths. I don't know how many people is on here, but we're going to get started. I'm going to start by having the different authors introduce themselves and tell us a little about their book, and please keep it brief. Let's start with Ms. Huff.
I am Cynthia Huff. I write historical romance. The book I'm currently promoting here at this conference is Rescuing Her Heart. And because I tend to make all my stories character driven, it's about a what if moment I had. The mail order bride didn't get such a hot husband and had a lot of things to deal with later. It takes place post-Civil War.
Okay. Let's go. Olivia is not here, so let's go with Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather Wood, and I write Christian historical fiction. My first book, Until We All Find Home, is about 4 siblings that find each other on opposite sides during the Civil War. They were orphaned as children, and now they're adults, and they're just 4 completely different people, opposites in every way. So the book I'm promoting today is the sequel to that, Until We All Run Free, and it continues the journeys of the 2 younger brothers after they meet Jesus, and they still are just learn to walk in their new faith and work through the massive differences that they have in their relationship. And it's also a romance.
Okay. Carole.
Hi, I'm Carole Towriss. I write biblical fiction. The book I'm talking about today is called Sold into Freedom. It's the first in a series of books that take place in cities that were visited by Paul. This one takes place in Philippi, and it's the story of the slave girl who was delivered from the demon of prophecy and the jailer in the earthquake in Philippi in Acts 16.
And Cynthia.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Roemer, and I write historical romance. We were talking before about the romance not being the main part of the story, and that's kind of what mine is. It's in there, but it's not the main thrust of the story. Mine is Beyond These War-Torn Lands. I don't know if you can see it. My light's kind of bright. But it takes place in the last year of the Civil War, and then immediately following the Civil War gets into a lot of the historical, the real life characters, assassination of the president and all of that. And it's about a Confederate, a lady from the South who encounters a Union soldier and how God leads them in their lives to touch each other's lives.
Okay. Well, I just found out Thursday who I was going to have on my panel, but I went and got samples of all your books and I read every last one of them, considering that I had piano class and choir rehearsal and everything else. So I was really impressed with all the books. And I've already bought one and I'm planning on buying some more tomorrow. My next question, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a question and then I'll have 2 people answer it. That way we can get around to everybody. But I'm going to ask the first 2 questions and then I'll see if any of our other participants has a question. Is that okay? Okay. All right. So my second question is, I want to know why you chose the locations that you did and how much research you did about those specific settings and the subject matter. And I'm talking to Carole and Cynthia. So let's say Cynthia go first.
Okay. As far as research, I did more research on this than all my other 3 books combined. Because I had real people, real events. My Prairie Sky series, I had to research the times, but I didn't really, most of the characters came from my imagination and the settings, not all the settings, but part of the setting. So in this book, when you've got real people and real events, you've got to be accurate. I'm a stickler for being accurate, and I'll search out those details until I find them. And so I did a lot of extensive research for it. As far as the setting, I knew I wanted the war to end, and the precursor to that, in my research, I found the Battle of Monogamy Junction, which is a lesser known battle, but that worked for where I wanted my characters to be there in Maryland. And so that's just, the progression of the story. That's where the setting was. And then, with the ending of the war, and it all fell in together. So.
Well, I didn't have much of a choice of what city or what year it took place in, because that's specified in the Bible, but the city no longer exists. So I just had to do a lot of research. I for most of my books, I think for all my books, I spend more time researching than I do writing. So just trying to figure out what buildings were what, and where they were, and who lived there, things like that.
Okay. All right. Does anyone have a question? Let me see.
I have a question. Sorry, I got to put my glasses on. For Carole, how do you make sure you stick to biblical truth and just enhance it and fill in, or how do you work with that?
Yeah, for biblical fiction, the first rule is you cannot contradict anything that's in scripture. So you start with that, then you go to history and you add that in, and then you start making up, like the Bible doesn't ever tell us what happened to the slave girl, just that Paul delivered the demon. In my book, she becomes a Christian. So those kind of things that aren't in the scripture, you're free to make up, but you can't ever contradict scripture.
Gotcha. Good to know.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, how do you go about starting? How do you get your storyline? I mean, different people, I've heard people say that someone mentioned something to them and they got the idea to write about it. I'm going to be asking this question to Cindy, and is Olivia on here yet? No. Cindy.
Oh, in rescuing her heart, I took that what if moment, because you hear a lot about mail order brides in this time period. Well, sometimes their hookup wasn't so great, and because I have family members who were in domestic violence, I thought this was a good opportunity to speak to that subject. So you have my main character Delilah has to rebuild her life after it was totally torn down by a horrible husband who burns his own house down, and having flashbacks to the Civil War, which again, PTSD, domestic violence, all these things are relatable today. And I like putting those relatable things in a historical setting, because not everything is going to be lovely, because that's not realistic. But we take her through, and someone who's read it, who went through that, felt I covered it very accurately. So that made me feel good.
Okay. Since Olivia isn't here, Carole, can you speak on that same question?
On the plot line,
How do you go about choosing your storyline?
well, again, I have to start with what's in the scripture. So we know that Paul came, met Lydia, delivered the girl from the demon, was then arrested, beaten, and thrown in jail. So
No,
most of the,
that's not what I meant. What
okay,
I meant,
I'm sorry.
yeah, I asked, how did you pick that subject? Let's put it that way. How did you pick that story?
The original story. I just decided to do stories based on the cities that Paul visited, and that was the first one that I picked.
Oh, okay. Well, that's simple. Anyone has a question? Anyone else? Okay. This is a example of something that I read in one of the little samples of your books. And I'll ask the question after I read it. Contradicting and agreeing were both activities that Jed rarely wasted his time or words on. Now, when I read that, I had read a little bit about him before, but that sentence and what was said about his past that was written before, it really crystallized that character for me. How do you know how to develop your characters so that the reader gets the picture you want them to have? You know, you have an idea in your head of the character. How do you get that across to your audience? Let's see. I'm going to ask, Cindy and Heather. Cindy.
How I get the characters, for my hero in my story, he's actually a secondary character in a novella I wrote about his twin brother. Mm-hmm. So it kind of gave me something to go with there. But I knew I already knew his backstory, that he had been in the POW camp, that he had been a chaplain, and the trauma that caused him to have his own flashbacks. So by just kind of sprinkling that in, where he has, because it's lightning, he was roped outside to a pole as punishment in the camp, and so when lightning struck, so whenever there's lightning, he has a real panic attack and curls up, and so that's something he has to fight. But I didn't just say, oh, by the way, but I took that just in a moment to riding back to the ranch, and it starts to rain. And then it starts to storm, and then it starts to lightning, and then his brother has to help him and get him home safe because he's lost it. And he's a very brave man, but he can't handle that. And the same with Delilah and her situations of domestic abuse. She has her own mechanisms for dealing with them, and you have to put that in your writing, or it's not realistic. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it sort of did. Heather.
Could you repeat the question?
The question, I read a little bit from the book, and then I asked, how do you know how to develop your characters so the reader gets the picture you want them to have of that person? You know, how do you develop that person so you have a clear picture of who that person is.
Yeah. I think part of it for me is I know my characters so well. I know them inside and out. A lot of my characters from these books have actually lived in my head for like 17 years. So they have simmered for a really long time. And then when I actually started writing them, I did, go ahead and do some further research into personality types and how different personalities act in different situations. And then I didn't just write like the straight personality type, I added in aspects from like their childhood trauma. How would that play out with this character? Not just how does childhood trauma play out in general, but how would it show up in this person, So by the time I wrote Jed, who said that quote that you read, I know he was in my head, and I knew him really well inside and out. And I really like him. I have a lot of respect for him. And so the fun part is just putting him down on paper then so other people can enjoy him too. As far as like how I do that, I don't know.
Okay. I keep putting myself on mute because I've got my dogs in their cages. They don't like that. So you might hear them whine. So that's why I put myself on mute. Have you ever had writer's block, and how do you move out of that? I thought I saw Olivia pop up here. Olivia, can you answer that question?
Yeah, I finally made it in. Sorry on my part. But writer's block, I'm in it right now. You just got to write through it. You got to write through it. Even if the stuff you write is bad, you still just got to push forward. Usually when I get writer's block, though, it's because something's wrong in my story. There's either something wrong with the flow of the story, the plot of the story, or one character. The book I'm working on now, all of a sudden I realized I have too many characters. So I kind of combined two of them into one character because I thought I really don't need this extra character. And because it's like the third book in the series, it seems like I keep getting more and more people involved. And I thought, no, I can cut this back. So, I mean, those are all things that push me with writer's block. So.
Okay, since you were late, I was going to ask you if you could tell us about the book that you are featuring.
Oh, Life Redeemed is the second book in my Secret of the Queen series. This book, they start in Tudor England, and now I'm up in Scotland again with this one. So, yeah, it takes place. It's kind of like a what if series, like what if, well, the first book was what if Lady Jane Grey lived, and then the second book is the sister of the hero. And it took her up to Scotland and her story there. And what if Queen Elizabeth came up to Scotland at a different time other than when she really did come. So that's basically what the story is. There's a lot of mystery in it. So that's all I can say. Yes.
Well, that was good. Have you ever had a project you had trouble finding a good way to end it? Heather?
Yeah, I think you always have that question of like where the ending is, because like I don't like to just end a book, with the romance or with the kiss, for example. So figuring out like where the character's journey ends, because I'm not a really big fan of neat bows that tie up. Like I like to tie up the big things, but not everything, because I'm just like, this book is this period of this character's life, right? So do we at any point in our life have like everything worked out at one time, right? So I tried to tie up like what the arc is for that character, but that doesn't mean that like everything in their life is tied up at the end of the book. So yeah, it is a question of like where that point is. And I think as you get to know your characters and their journeys, I think it makes itself clear eventually. But yeah, it seems like, you know, the romance is like the easy ending, right? And so I'm always looking for, I guess, what their deeper arc is.
Cynthia, could you answer that same question? Cynthia, you're on mute.
Yeah, I realized that. I said I never quite know how my story's gonna, I mean, I kind of know the main thrust of the story and where the characters are gonna end up, but I never quite know the ending until I get there. And so it just has to come to me as the story goes. I don't plot out everything along the way, but I just, you know, have a rough outline of where I want my characters to go, and then let them and God lead the way there. And so that the ending is, it just is a normal progression of the writing for me. So, but like Heather said, it's just a part of their life. So I'm kind of like her. I like to wrap up the questions readers might have through the story, you know, the things that I open up in the story in their lives. But it's kind of an open ending for the rest of their life. And then I also write series, so I usually have them in the next book a little bit too as minor characters.
Does anyone else have a question?
I do like that when you get to see familiar characters in the next book and see like where they are at the next point in their journey. I always like that when authors do that.
Mm-hmm. Any of our participants have any questions?
I
Okay,
like
hold on.
I like what Cynthia said. It doesn't always, you're not always sure you kind of know where it's going to end, but it doesn't always end where people might expect. I write historical romance, but in this particular book, although they're in love, they don't get married in this book. They will in the sequel, but as secondary characters, because it's not realistic for someone who's gone through a damaged life to suddenly in a few months have their act together, marry the man of their dreams and not have issues. So you kind of plan those things so that in the next book you can address them, because it's 2 years later, then it makes more sense. And also it gives the reader a chance to go, oh, I can't wait to see what happens next, because if it's all tied up in a neat bow, they may never read your next book.
I have a question. How do you all choose your time periods? So I guess that's for everyone.
For me, Civil War was always my pet time period. From the time I was like in middle school, I fell in love with the Civil War. So I was a Civil War reenactor through high school. And it's just always fascinated me. So my first book is set in the Civil War, but now with the second book, we're out of the Civil War. And I'm liking that too, because now I'm starting to get into the early Victorian era, and I've just enjoyed getting to know more about that era.
I would have to say is, my first series was a medieval series. So then I just moved a little bit forward in history to the 1600s. So it was easy. It was an easier jump for me than to going to a whole new different time period. So, and I enjoy it. Like I said, I'm putting 3 books in this time period. before I probably jump forward again.
Okay.
I like after the Civil War, because it's what you can do with the characters is so much relatable to what people have experienced right now. Because of having PTSD after war, I deal with a lot of that. I deal with a lot of situations at some point or other with domestic abuse or feelings of inadequacy. And they kind of, that time period is a good time period to draw that from. And so that works for me. And I've done a lot of research on that time period. So I've been able to take that research and take it through like 4 books. So that worked out well for me.
Cynthia, did you answer?
I think we just choose time periods that really hold our interest. That is with me. I've always liked the 1800s, mid 1800s. I just been fascinated with that time period. And with each of my books, my first book started in 1855, and then my next one was 1856, 1859, and then graduated up to 1864. And so, like Heather, I just enjoy the researching, and the time period for me is just as my characters grow and go through changes. Of course, my first series is separate from this 4th book, but I think we just choose periods we're interested in. At least I do.
Okay. Olivia, did you answer?
I'm sorry, yes, I did.
Okay. Carole, did you answer?
I would just agree with Cynthia that we pick stories that interest us. I wrote 4, I think, set in the Old Testament, and then I decided I wanted to explore the history of the early church, so I went to the New Testament.
Have any of you ever written anything other than historical books?
I wrote one. I wrote one book that was set in modern times. I liked it. It was, I like it. Of course I like it. I wrote it. It was more or less, it was with a child that had a disability, and I just felt the story needed to be told. And sometimes I hem and haw if I should write a sequel to it, but it was written quite a few years ago, so I haven't. But Joshua's Prayer, yeah. So yeah, it's the only contemporary I ever wrote. But I, just felt the need that I had to write that one. I think everybody should give it a try.
I have a contemporary published and a couple of others that are written or in the process of being written. For the same reason, I felt the story that I had in my contemporary, which you can probably see behind me, New Duet, needed to be told. Because after I wrote my first historical, I had a publisher ask me, why are you writing a contemporary? Because I have a story that has to be told. And that's, I think, the only reason I would have deviated from one to the other. But I do like both genres. So it wasn't hard, and I put it in my own city that I live in now. So I didn't have to do any research. So that worked out real well.
Okay. I have a question here. What are you hoping readers take away from your book? It says anyone, so anyone can answer that question.
Well, beyond these
You want
war-torn
me to
lands.
choose?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Beyond these war-torn lands is not only, well, pertinent for then, but now, because it explores bitterness and hatred and all that's going on in today's, there's so much violence and hatred going on, and it's how Drew and Caroline worked through that. And, they were on opposing sides of the war. Their families were on opposing sides of the war. And it's all about forgiveness and learning to love instead of hate. And so I think that's very pertinent for us today. But it's got a secondary layer. Caroline deals with a verbally abusive father. And she has to really overcome a lot of bitterness towards him. So that's a big part of the story too, is her dealing with a verbally abusive father. So those are issues, that I want my readers to take away how God can work in people's lives if we show Christ-like love instead of responding in bitterness and hatred.
I have to say, my first medieval series that I wrote, each book took place about a Christian principle. Like the second book in the series, the first book was just a novella, but the second book in the series was Pride Comes Before a Fall. And it talked about a man that was very prideful, thought he was very good religiously and everything else. And how he had a fall to humble himself to be built up again. And the next book dealt with a knight that told a lot of lies and the consequences with telling lies. And if you go through the series, another book dealt with loving your enemies. So each book had an underlying Christian message to it. And I think all our books do. So.
I have another question. It says, where did it go? Do you mostly read historical genre, or do you read across genres? And it didn't have a name to who they wanted to ask this question. So that's something we can do real quick all the way around. So let's start with Cindy, and then Cynthia, and Carole, Heather, and then Olivia. Go ahead.
I'm addicted to reading, so absolutely. And reading across genres helps me be better at writing in my own genre.
I probably 9/10 of what I read is historical, just because that's what I enjoy. But I do read some. I like split time novels where there's the modern and historical, and I also do some modern day, but for the most part historical.
I read mostly historical, mostly biblical, historical.
Heather.
I like, as long as it's Christian, I like historical and contemporary fiction. I've been reading some more like clean and inspirational reads, and I'm finding that they aren't quite what I'm looking for. So as long as it's, Christian, has a good solid message, then both for me. And I've been reading more genres since I've been reading more for other authors and critiquing for other authors. It's opened my horizons to a whole bunch of other genres that I didn't read before. It's been great.
Mm-hmm.
I read, I'm sorry.
I was going to call your name.
Okay, I read all genres. Yeah, all the way across the board, because I just don't want to be in the rut of reading what I write. So I read all types. I'll read mysteries, romances, Christian fiction, nonfiction. Yeah, anything that I can get my hands on, I usually read.
Okay. Let's have any more. Okay. I'm going to ask you each to tell us a little bit about your next book or project. And let's start with Olivia.
I'm working on the third book in the Secrets of the Queen series, which actually it takes the little boy in the second book, The Life Redeemed, which is my featured book. And he's all grown up now. And as sweet as he was as a little boy, he's kind of a scoundrel now. So I'll leave it at that. But
Okay.
yeah, it will be the last book in that series too.
Okay. Carole.
I'm working on the next book in the series after Sold into Freedom, and it's set in Thessalonica. It's about one of the Greek women who came to know the Lord, and the hero is Jason. And in Acts, it says when they wanted to get to Paul, they all went to Jason's house. And apparently everybody in Thessalonica knew who that was, but we know nothing. There's a Jason who says hello in one of Paul's greetings at the end of his letter to the Romans. He's like, Jason says hi, but that's all we know. So it's about Jason and one of the Greek women are the two main characters.
Who's next? Cindy?
I just finished the sequel to Rescuing Your Heart, and I'm working on the sequel to Angelina's Resolve, which was the newest one that just came out in October. So it's their series. I got at least one more story in the first series and probably a couple more in the second. They're all both of them take place after the Civil War. Both of them are set in Kansas, but they're two different storylines.
Two different storylines. Okay.
Well, Rescuing Her Heart is about the abused woman, while in Angelina's Resolve, that storyline, they build a village of women, and she's an architect with she has different needs.
Okay. And Heather? A job or something like that that help you to develop your writing or give you ideas for your writing or anything. And that's for any and all of you.
I have to say I'm involved in it doesn't help me. I mean, it gets me outside. I'm involved in our church alert team. I don't know if you, that's Lutheran Early Response Team. And what we do is we go into like disaster areas, hurricane areas, and clean up tornado areas, or just areas where there's been storms or where the need is. And what I will say it does do when I'm working physically, that's when most of my ideas come to me. So, but the funny thing is I probably should write a book set in one, like doing a disaster, but I've never done that. So, but I do the physical activity and meeting people. I will say this, that I have developed, people that I have met have become characters in my book. I just sent them back in the past, but there's always a character trait there or something I thought, I can use this guy. They just don't know it. So that's how it goes.
Anyone else do anything, whether it's a ministry or things happen at their jobs that help them, or some organization that they're in? Anyone? No? Okay. Let's see. Anyone else have a question? There's a bunch of information out there on the chat that Cindy has put out there about the authors, websites, and different things. And if you miss any author's website or book link, please scroll back in the chat, and she has all that information in there. Does anyone write in series? Okay, that's a question. Does anyone write in series?
Yes and no. I have a couple that are standalones.
Yeah, that was my question. Does everyone write in series? So it seemed like everyone was talking
everyone.
about series. So
Mine was supposed to be a standalone.
I have another one.
My contemporary is the only standalone I have.
Okay. I have another question. How do you manage to stick with the history of what happened, but balance that with creating something new and unique? He didn't say a name, so I assume this is for anyone. How do you manage to stick with history of what happened, but balance that with creating something new and unique? Olivia.
I cheat, you know. I shouldn't say that, but my what if, I take it out. I still use the time period. I still use events in that history. But then I change it. I'll change a character, you know, like I said, in the first book in Secret of the Queen series, Lady Jane Grey, who was queen for 9 days in England, died on the block, got her head chopped off. Well, I had her live. Okay, so that changes the whole story. In the second book, Queen Elizabeth had some secrets that really aren't true, but I created them. And in this third book, well, it's Queen Elizabeth still. She has this birthmark that's very unique, and it's on several other people. So you wonder if she has another child or not. But again, I created that. That's not real. But I did use the time period. I did use the characters around her that were real characters. And that's, I just add. As I say, I cheat. So.
Cindy, you look like you want to say something.
Do I? Because I kind of have picked my setting and my time period, if it works in the storyline, as Olivia said, it's like with the Angelina's Resolve, because I took the idea from something that happened in history, but I changed it and I put it 10 years previously. But I also wrote that in my back notes. This is where it came from in history, and this is why I did it the way I did it. In order to make it believable, I wanted them to see that historical facts. But that's one thing you can do. Anytime you write a historical, you can say, well, yeah, this is here. What if, in my case, a woman created the city as opposed to all the men at that time period who were trying to make utopian towns? So it's just taking a little thing and changing it slightly. But when I started Angelina's Resolve, I had to make sure it was before the Chicago fire, because she's leaving Chicago. And as an architect, if you leave in the middle of the fire, why would you do that? There's a great opportunity. So I had to switch that up to fit my narrative. But the Chicago fire is mentioned in my second book, but by then they've already established their town. So then we have something different.
Okay. Does everyone have a favorite point of view or tense? First person, third person, present or past tense? Heather.
I prefer third person. I prefer it for reading and writing, although I do enjoy books in first person. It's not my first choice though. And definitely past tense.
Cynthia?
I'm with Heather. I like past tense, third person. It really, I just recently read a first person book and it was shocking to me because I just don't read those. And it was really hard. It was slow reading for me because I'm used to third person.
Mhm. And Carole?
The same thing, third person, past tense. Yeah, I read a couple first person ones too, and it's really difficult if you're not used to that. But people who do it are very good at it.
Mhm. Okay. Let me see. Anything else? Anyone else has? We've got a couple of minutes here. It's 8:17.
I wouldn't mind answering that question about how you make history unique.
Go ahead.
That was asked previously. I actually prefer to write history like exactly as it is. I love research and I love history. So I actually kind of write so I can research. That's just fun for me. It's an excuse for me to learn. So as far as how do I manage to stick with the history while balancing with something new, like Civil War is written a lot, but when I wrote my first book, it was about the Northern home front, which is not often written. It's either the battlefields or it's the Southern home front. So to write it, I don't think I've ever read a book about the Civil War in the city of Chicago. But I'm from Chicago. And so I just wrote about like all the things I loved in one book. And then making it about the four siblings. That was just an idea I had a really, really long time ago. So that's how I do something unique with it. But if you pick up one of my books, you can take it to the bank with the history.
Like the tailgate on that. I'm with Heather. I can't change. I can't be not stick with history the way it is. I just learn the facts, learn how it happened, and then I just insert my characters into the cracks and find a way to get those characters in that situation.
I would agree with that too. And I think the unique parts are the characters. The history is always going to be the same, but it's how those characters react, what individual problems they have, what their families are like. That's what makes it unique, I think.
Yeah.
Well, that's our time. I enjoyed having you on my panel, and I hope everyone enjoyed the panel. And thank you for the questions from the participants. And everyone have a